Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror interview segment where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre world from Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. This week we're talking to Caseen Gaines, author of the new We Don't Need Roads, the making of the Back to the Future trilogy. Caseen is a popular culture historian, is the author of books like Inside Pee-wee's Playhouse, the untold, unauthorized, and unpredictable story of a pop phenomenon, which received the 2012 Independent Publishers Book Award, silver medal in popular culture leisure category. He wrote A Christmas Story behind the scenes of a Hollywood classic. He also directs theater, teaches high school English in New Jersey where he lives, and aspires to be a Renaissance man and fears being a jack of all trades. And the new book is We Don't Need Roads, the making of the Back to the Future trilogy, as I said. Okay, so you fear being a jack of all trades, but you want to be a Renaissance man. Can you explain to me the difference between those?
Yes. So, first of all, thank you for having me on. Very excited. In my mind, at least, a Renaissance man is like a positive thing. If someone's described as being a Renaissance man, it's like, oh, they can do this and they can do that, and they do them all well. And a jack of all trades is like, a jack of all trades, a master of none. There's sort of like a negative connotation that you're trying to do everything, but you're doing them all, mediocrely. So, but it's okay, because when my mother read it, she was like, are you making fun of yourself? What exactly are you saying here? But, it's just, it's my attempt to be clever.
Well, like the professor on Gilligan's Island, Renaissance.
Exactly.
That guy could do anything. He could play
exactly. I would say that he is a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Whereas Gilligan is a jack of all trades.
All right. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Back to the Future. You probably are somebody who's thought now about Back to the Future more than most people. And so this is something that I've just been dying to ask somebody who's thought about these a lot, and is, okay, the first Back to the Future movie is a movie about a boy who, at its core, is about a boy who gets to go back and discover what his parents were like 30 years ago, right? And he goes from the mid-1980s to the mid-1950s, which are two very, very different eras. Do you think the magic of the film is that it happens to be those eras as much as it is this universal thing of seeing our own parents? I mean, do you think it has something to do with the difference between the 80s and the 50s, or do you think it could be any era?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that is why I don't think Back to the Future will ever be remade. It's at its core. I mean, there's one joke in Back to the Future that I think sums up why these two time periods are so important. The president of the United States was someone who was a Hollywood actor during the time period that Marty's parents were teenagers. And so, there's such a shorthand that is able to be had when that's a reality of the world that, that this film is set in. Also, we just have such a nostalgia in this country for the 1950s. It's why Leave It to Beaver is still on TV. I Love Lucy is still on TV. Why Grease is still on TV, and why people still perform it in high schools and community theaters. We have a love affair with the 1950s, and I think that Back to the Future is so perfect because it is the 1980s and the 1950s, and also going 30 years ahead in part two is in the 21st century. There's nothing more future than going into a whole other century. And so I think that it's a film that's going to remain in 1985. I don't think that we'll ever see a reboot or anything like that.
Well, I was just trying to do the exercise. I mean, like, setting aside for a moment the vision of 2015 that's in Back to the Future Part 2, I was trying to imagine the Back to the Future the 2015 that teenagers today live in, like the counterparts to Marty, the 16 or whatever it is, 17-year-olds in 2015, and if they were to try to time jump back to 1985, would the world be as different? It might be to be honest with you, there would probably be things that are as different and as confusing as Marty finds them, but I don't think there'd be as magical. There's something really sweet and lovely about the 50s when we go back there and, the Mr. Sandman stuff and all those things.
Yeah, I don't think the 1980s had the same level of innocence as the 1950s did. And in a weird sort of way, actually, a kid would go back to the 1980s and they would still see Madonna. They would still see, there are certain things in the they would still see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They would still see.
Wow, that's a fascinating thought. You're right.
I don't know if it would seem all that different. So much changed in the 30 years between the 1950s and the 1980s, and while things have changed significantly in the last 30 years, also, I just think that we nostalgia has become so big, and that's actually one of the things that they sort of predicted in Back to the Future too. Going back to the Cafe 80s, the idea that we would have this sort of resurgence for 1980s pop culture.
Wow, I remember actually seeing that, Cafe 80s as it was, and I'm surprised that there's no such thing as a Cafe 80s now. To be perfectly honest with you, that seems like a winning business plan. But I do you remember that with all the the Max Headroom stuff and there was a Ronald Reagan Max Headroom and everything. I think my favorite element about Cafe 80s was all of the decorations are done in those sort of multicolored geometrical shapes. That was this sort of predominant design element of the 80s. You actually say in your book, you do all these interviews with people, and I want to ask you about what that was like, but there's a moment when you're talking to Leah Thompson, and she said that to get into the character for Lorraine, she would actually sing Mr. Sandman and other stuff, right? And that she said that it was easier for her to imagine the other, because she was playing really two characters in the film, the older version of herself and the younger version.
Right. Yeah, and Leah Thompson actually, I don't know about right now, but at least at the time, she says that she was sort of more of a tomboy and that it was very hard for her initially to play that young Lorraine, the Lorraine that we see for so much of the film, the 1955 Lorraine, where she is an innocent, and she is sweet and she is coy and she is cute. That's not Leah Thompson's, that's not the way that she was at that point in her life. And so she would sing Mr. Sandman, and she just thought that it would get her, if that song is on the radio and that is a song that the teenagers of the day are listening to, it would make you feel innocent, and it would make you do it in a way that's genuine and not have you make fun of the character, while you're playing it. And so that was.
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. The idea of the innocence. I mean, because remember, one of the things that Marty's appalled by is that she is innocent but sexually curious. She's innocent but she drinks and she smokes. She does all these things, and yet whereas the character that she plays in the 80s, the 40-something character, I guess, is not innocent. She's cynical, although she's supposedly given up all this stuff. I love the stuff where she says, in my day, a girl wouldn't call a boy or sit in a car with a boy or all this stuff that she lists. That was what you actually spoke to a number of the cast members through the whole, because you have a lot of quotations from Leah Thompson. I think some of the most perceptive stuff comes from Leah Thompson. But
I agree. Some of the stuff that she mentioned, it's just, sorry, I know I interrupted you, but it's one of those things where when you're conducting these interviews and you're working on a book like this, someone asked me, I had a Q&A at a bookstore, and someone asked me, when you speak with people, do you steer your questions towards what you think the answer will be, in terms of do you get the story in your head and then just sort of just ask the questions that get you quotes for the story? And, Leah Thompson's interview in particular, I think, points to what can happen when you're lucky working on a book like this. She spoke with me. She was driving somewhere, and we spoke while she was in the car for maybe an hour or so, maybe longer. And so I like to imagine, this is me imposing this backstory to our conversation, but I like to imagine that I think she was driving from the set of her ABC family show to her house. So she had just worked. She's decompressing on the phone. And so our conversation, I think, was incredibly candid, and it was really reflective. And, I know that I'm in a different mindset when I'm sitting at my desk in my office and when I'm driving and when I'm, I just think that interview was so casual and I got so much great stuff from her because of the forum. And I think that's why the stories in this book are so different than like promotional material on a DVD special feature where everyone knows what they're saying is, where they're sitting at Universal Studios on a set,
between a couple
it's a different atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, I wanted to ask you specifically about that. You say in the intro that you found that you'd been into these movies or you knew a lot about them and you'd heard the same anecdotes over and over and over. And you suspected that those anecdotes were sort of fossilized versions of themselves. And if you got a chance to talk to people, you'd find deeper, sometimes different, divergent versions of these anecdotes and these stories in the making of these pictures. And that further, that your suspicions had turned out to be correct. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that, one of the big questions with a book like this is, so what new are you going to tell me about Back to the Future? I've watched all the special features. I've been a fan for 30 years. There's nothing new that you can offer me. And so the best example of what I'm talking about, I guess the two best examples, one has to do with Eric Stoltz, where everyone says Eric Stoltz, was hired, because the head of the studio wanted him. He wasn't delivering the level of comedy that they needed. They let him go, and that's the story, right? It's like those 3 bullet points. But I was more interested in what was it like for someone like Leah Thompson, who had worked with Eric Stoltz before Back to the Future, got her part in Back to the Future in large part because of Eric Stoltz, actually, and then has her friend fired and then she has to continue on. What's it like for the crew who just shot for 6 weeks with one actor and then gets told, guess what, guys, we're continuing in production for another 2 months or so, and we're redoing everything we just did. Right, we're going to reshoot, 40% of the picture. For me, I was more interested. What was it like for Eric Stoltz on a skateboard, playing Johnny B. Good? Those things. And so I approached, whenever I asked someone about Eric Stoltz, it was not, so tell me what happened with Eric Stoltz. It was, okay, you were the guitar coach. Was Eric Stoltz good? How often did you rehearse? Was he receptive? Did he get frustrated? It was those sorts of conversations, and I think that's what makes this interesting. The other thing that I think really pushes beyond sort of the stock story is this business with the hoverboard accident on the set of Back to the Future 2.
Oh, my God.
They mentioned
that was amazing. I'd never heard it. Can you please explain that accident? Because I was still a little confused as to why this occurred. But
sure. Yeah. So when they were filming the hoverboard crash into the clock tower with Griff's gang in Back to the Future 2, there was a stunt woman by the name of Cheryl Wheeler who was basically, the long story short is they set up the stunt. They did lots and lots of tests of the stunt, and the tests went fine, ultimately after there were a lot of trial and error to get it to go fine.
Sure.
Then ultimately it went fine. Because of the demands of the shooting schedule, they had to take down all of the stunt rigging because they were going to actually do the stunt a couple of days later. And Cheryl was very concerned that if you're doing a test, you don't take everything down because what if the marks are not correct, when you put it back up? But they couldn't test it again once they re-rigged it because the fake glass was in, so they couldn't run someone through the clock tower, otherwise they would shatter the glass and it would be very costly and time-consuming. So long story short, the marks were just a little bit off, and she ended up, everyone veered to the left, which was not really a problem for anyone except for her, who was on the far left, and she hit the pillar of the clock tower, and it was someone's job to press a button that would cut loose everyone's cord and drop them to safety pads. But because she was not where she was supposed to be, when her wire was cut, she did not fall onto safety pads and she fell onto concrete.
And she busted her face. I mean,
her face, her arm, it was a mess. I mean, she literally almost died. She was dropped from 30 feet in the air. And so that's a story that on the DVD they mention. They say there was an accident on the set of filming there was an accident when we were filming the scene. Literally, like one sentence. And, when I spoke with Cheryl, when I spoke with the other stunt people, other people that were on set that day, it became a really important story to the book because for those people that were there, they can't talk about Back to the Future Part 2 without talking about that crash. Seeing someone almost die obviously has colored their perception of making that film. And so that was a story that became really important to the book.
Yeah. Well, and it is, and it gives you a lot to think about in terms of remembering that these stories that are beloved to us, and that you always imagine sort of are full of brotherly love and innocence. Actually, there are some hardcore organizations behind them, and they sometimes play real hardball with people that maybe it's not fair to play a lot of hardball with. Including this stunt woman who certainly didn't ask to be pummeled this way, right? And it is a really gripping read. I mean, to me personally, Back to the Future Part 2 is not, to me, the strongest chapter in that trilogy. But, having said all that, you certainly don't expect that something that rough was going down.
Well, and to me, I think that, I've had people, at this point, I've done, lots of interviews about the book, and I've had people say, just this morning, someone asked me, well, are you, was it important for you to sort of get the dirt and tell, the controversial aspects of making this movie, because that's what people want to read. And
right.
Genuinely, my answer is that's not where I come from in writing this book. In fact, in a weird sort of way, I think that the Eric Stoltz situation, the situation with Cheryl Wheeler, any of the oddities of Crispin Glover on set, I think all of these things, and the fact that the movies are still so good and have held up so much, and that they got these films done on time and mostly on budget, I think that's such a testament. I think that's more impressive to me than everyone, the shoot was perfect and everything was great. Well, if the shoot is perfect and everything is great, then I would hope the film is great. But if the shoot is complicated and there's lots of, there's a challenge in making these films, and then the film is still spectacular, to me that's the more impressive achievement.
A lot of the huge achievement here on the second one seems to be just a real crunch of time and pressure. It's certainly you can sense it from Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis in the material in your book about just how worried they were about being able to measure up to what they had done before. I want to go back though for a second and talk about the actor playing Marty. So Michael J. Fox, you said, I can't believe I just said that way, by the way, because Michael J. Fox. But okay, Michael J. Fox, you say he had just a way of getting a laugh when he needed a laugh, right? That he comes in, he replaces Eric Stoltz, and everybody feels this great weight lifted from him. And an example that you call out was that Eric Stoltz wasn't crazy about the comedy. He couldn't wrap his head around why you would fall over when you were putting on your pants. That was just something that Eric Stoltz would never do, and that Michael J. Fox just sort of did, as just the way that he was as an actor.
Yeah, and that's really it. Eric Stoltz is a really he's a classically trained actor. I mean, he has. I don't know if you are. I do theater, so I know. When I looked at the names of some of the people that Eric Stoltz has studied with, Stella Adler is amazingly revered, as an acting coach, and Eric Stoltz worked with her, so he could not really, he did not grasp, I shouldn't say he couldn't grasp, he wanted explanation as to why would Marty fall when he's putting on his pants. He certainly has put on his pants many times in his life. I doubt he falls every time. Why would he do it then? Zemeckis would say, well, because it's funny. And Eric Stoltz would say, yeah, but that's not a good enough reason.
Right.
There has to be a better reason than because it's funny. And, again, I know we're talking a lot about Leah Thompson on this call, but Leah Thompson actually brought up a really great point to me where she said, Back to the Future is a film where if you stop to think about it too much, there are some things that don't really hold muster. It's a little bit weird at the incestuous nature of Marty and Lorraine. Some there are paradoxes. There are some things that just don't really hold up. However, what Michael J. Fox does in that film is his performance is so light and funny that you never take the time to stop and think about the aspects that are maybe a little bit dark, and what Eric
that was
Stoltz
actually
was
one
doing,
that you called out. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted that particularly that darkness Eric Stoltz was interested in, and I had somebody else send me this question. When you get to the end, this apparently Eric Stoltz spent a lot of time thinking about this. When you get to the end of this movie, there is a version of Michael J. Fox who is dead to everybody.
Right.
Right. That Michael J. Fox jumps forward. He lands in a 1985 that is way swankier. Where his brother wears a suit to the office every day, and he's got a nice new truck, and all of the memories that he has of people for the past 30 years have never happened, and they have essentially completely lost the Marty that they've known all their lives. That is a profoundly sad concept, And
Eric Stoltz immediately, he got that immediately. At the read-through, everyone's sitting around reading the script, and Eric Stoltz says, well, that's so sad. And Zemeckis says, well, what's sad? And he goes, well, exactly what you just said. And, it was one of those things where Leah and the other, a lot of the other actors were sort of like, dude, that's not the movie we're making. Yes, that is the way that, yes, you can certainly interpret the ending that way, but don't.
Right, that's not the kind of work it is.
Right.
It makes you think you could go and write another movie that chose to go down that road, and be kind of that sort of sort of a time travel think piece if you really wanted to. But that's not what they're making here. This is what is this anyway? What is Back to the Future? Is it a boy's adventure? I mean, what kind of a story? I know less now that I've been thinking about it than I knew when I started.
Well, to me, it's weird because I've spent obviously the last at least 2 years of my life heavily in the trenches with this movie, and I think Back to the Future is great because time travel is just almost a gimmick to tell a story about family, to tell a story about relationships, whether it's a relationship of Marty growing to appreciate his parents, Marty's parents growing to appreciate each other, Marty realizing how much Doc means to him, Doc realizing that, there are consequences of opening Marty's letter, but I value Marty has left such an impact on me in the 1950s. 1950s Doc says Marty has left such a profound impact on my life that I'm going to open that letter, consequences be damned. Marty says, I know that I should not go. Yeah, exactly. Marty says, I should not go back to 1885, but I care about my friend. Doc says there are consequences of staying with Clara, but I'm going to do it because I love her. And I think that the thing that drives these movies is that they are all about character. And that is what makes these movies stand out. The time travel aspect complicates the relationships between the characters, but this is not a movie about, wow, wouldn't it be great to see King Arthur's court? And wouldn't it be great to see the dinosaurs? And wouldn't it be great to see, that's not what it's about. And I think that's why, we're still talking about Back to the Future after 30 years. And I say still because there are very few movies that once they debuted, we never stopped talking about them. Star Wars. There are it's not like we're just talking about Back to the Future now because it's the 30th anniversary. You and I, this is our first time that we've spoken, and I guarantee you that you and I have spoken about Back to the Future to someone every single month, at least, of every year since we first saw this movie.
I think there's a great likelihood that that's true. I'm trying to think. Certainly every 6 months, but probably every month. I mean,
something hoverboards, or you see a DeLorean, you go, Back to the Future.
For sure.
You're driving and you find that you're getting close to 88 miles an hour, and just something.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure it's everywhere.
And I was thinking about the fact that my grandfather, who was not a part of any of these generations, right? He loved Back to the Future 3 because of all the Western stuff. So many people have been fixated for years on Back to the Future 2 because of those hoverboards, which has always struck me as strange. I totally identified with Robert Zemeckis going, we care about the hoverboard. This is like I mean, no disrespect, especially if you're a huge hoverboard fan, okay? But who cares? That's like the least interesting thing to me about that entire movie is a floating skateboard. I have never understood why people fixate on this concept. Especially when I love the vision of the movies. I love the vision of Cafe 80s, and I was intrigued. I was intrigued by like the clothes and stuff like that. I was troubled. There's a bunch of things about that second movie that I think stain to a certain extent the first movie, which I think is near golden. I mean, I can find almost no flaws in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
No. The second one, casting Michael J. Fox as his own daughter, is a mystifying decision. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, that decision never made any sense to me. I don't get it. It's sort of goofy, and it strikes the wrong note. But then again, you love these pictures, so you may have a different perspective on that.
Well, I think it is an odd choice, and I think what happened was, you had a lot of things at play in Back to the Future too. One of them is the schedule, as you mentioned, and I think the other thing is that Fox then, 2 Michael J. Foxes, 3 Michael J. Foxes. I think that it was sort of I think it was like a meta parody almost. That's my take on it. I think that the filmmakers were aware of how silly it was, and that was part of the joke. It is my take, but I'll
buy that. I'll buy that. I mean,
it definitely seems like it's played for laughs, right? It seems like it's not, done completely seriously.
No, that's true. That's totally true. But when you compare it with, like, Lorraine, who you really feel for very deeply, I love the stuff. I mean, this is one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen in the movies. When the movie laughs itself and Marty goes back to the first movie and is literally running around in the background of the first film, that is a bizarre choice in an era when people didn't even have, home video, to try to put that together. Even the timing seems to work pretty well when he's running around the enchantment dance.
Yeah, when I spoke with Robert Zemeckis, he said something, and it stuck in my head since. We had this conversation almost 2 years ago at this point, and he said Back to the Future Part 2 is the most interesting movie I've ever made. Now, interesting, of course, is, interesting does not mean best, right? But interesting means interesting, and I think that I tend to agree with him. I think that he is very proud, and should be proud, frankly, of the fact that the first film was so successful, and Universal would have been incredibly happy if they just made the same movie. If they just said, we're going to take Marty and we're going to go to the 60s instead, which is sort of what the first draft, it is what the first draft of that movie was. But instead, this was Bob Zemeckis' idea to go back and look at scenes from the first movie from a new perspective. And you could only do that in a film about time travel. And so I do think that movie deserves sort of more credit for its ambition at a time where they did not have to be ambitious. You know, no one would have faulted them for being lazy. And you can say lots of things about Back to the Future too, but you can't say it's a lazy film at all.
No, that's for sure. You are absolutely correct. Yeah, in fact, it's maybe an embarrassment of riches, because there's things that that I might not like, but if you wait around, there's something else that's actually pretty interesting. You know. So,
well, there's too much.
So, yeah.
I think actually, I agree with you actually. I think the fault of that movie, or the biggest fault of that movie, well, I think there's two things. Number one, I think it's a that's Biff's movie. You know, when I think about those three movies, I think the first Back to the Future is Marty's movie, right? Or in a way, it's Marty's movie, or it's like George's movie. You know, it's like the two of them.
Yeah, it is George's movie in a big way. Yeah.
Yeah, the second movie is really Biff's movie with you know, the alternate 1985, the sports almanac. You know, Biff really is a driving force of that film. And then the third movie is Doc's movie. And so I think when your movie is centered around the villain, it can't help but be darker and heavier, you know, no pun intended, than what maybe audiences are into when, you know, sort of a nebbish, you know, cute kid is the driving force of the movie, like in the first one. And the other thing I think is that there's just so much more movie. There's so much movie, almost too much movie for like the 2 hours. You know, in that they go to so many different time periods. I could see an audience watching it, you know, on the big screen, going like, "What?" Like I can barely keep up. You know, it's a movie that demands that you really pay attention and go 88 miles per hour with it, and that it's so tonally different than the first and third films.
I think that's right. By the way, you mentioned 88. When I watched this movie in the theaters, because I remember the church youth group that I was hanging out with a lot when I was, whatever I was, 14 years old or something. And I remember everybody, we watched it numerous times in the theaters, and I remember everybody wanting to you know, trying to drive 88 miles an hour in the parking lot of the mall in the first movie, 1985. It was funny. It was about 4 years before the second one came out, so there was a good distance between the two. But wow, I was curious. I wanted to ask one more thing about the people that you interviewed. What surprised you about Christopher Lloyd? I mean, I've never seen an interview with Christopher Lloyd ever, and I'm wondering if there was anything that was interesting about speaking to him.
Well, yes, a lot. You know, Christopher Lloyd was a great get for this book, frankly. You know, and I
do a lot of interviews. Is that the deal, or? I'm
sorry. Oh, he doesn't. He doesn't really do a lot of interviews, actually. You know, from what I've been told. And so it was great to speak with him. I think he was very candid with me, and I think the thing that struck me the most about speaking to him was his number one, his pride in the Back to the Future films, especially coming from an actor who he doesn't like to see himself on screen. He doesn't, you know, he always goes, "Oh, I could have done this better. I could have done this differently. Why'd they use this take?" And he said, you know, when I watch these Back to the Future films, I know they're good films because I don't mind watching them. You know, and I hate watching myself.
Right.
The other thing with him is I think that he has such a love for Michael J. Fox. And that, to me, was something, in speaking with him, you know, it almost gives me chills not just saying it, but, like, you know, you can, you know, this is my third book, and so you speak with people, and sometimes, you know, the actor is not always what you'd hope they'd be, or, you know, and it's not for any necessary, you know, for a reason, but, you know, the character they're playing on screen is a character, of course, so it could be very different than the actor.
Yeah.
But Christopher Lloyd, just hearing the way that he spoke about Michael J. Fox and how much he loves Michael and how much fun he had and how, you know, they have a lifelong friendship, you know, I'm listening to him and I'm going, that's Doc. You know, you know, these are two people where literally life has imitated art, and they have become, fantastic friends, and they have a bond that still remains so strong to this day.
No, it's. I was just thinking about the fact that, like, in the movie where Michael J. Fox plays a ghost hunter that he did, now I can't remember what, The Frighteners. There's a movie called The Frighteners that Michael J. Fox, and in like the cut scenes, bloopers and so forth, there was this interesting thing that Michael J. Fox did while he was driving, where he would accidentally call his counteractor Doc. It was like it was like built into him at that point after 3 movies to call the other guy Doc. It was just so charming, this relationship. That's really cool. Wow. By the way, I wanted to mention the thing probably that stuck with me the most when I was watching Back to the Future again was Bottle Caps, was the struggle that Marty has opening his Pepsi. Do you remember that there's this bit? And he has all of this stuff, where he's got this, and he's talking to George, and George is not so stupid. He's talking to George, and meanwhile he's trying to open this thing, and George just sort of, in the middle of the scene, without breaking, takes it out of his hand, pops it open on the bottle opener, and hands it back to him. There is so much beautiful, like, heavily thought out physical business like that.
And it's so simple. It's so seemingly simple. That's the thing that I think with Back to the Future. I mean, my goodness, I don't know if there has ever been a better and more simple idea than saying, let's have a teenager accidentally go back in time and see his parents as teenagers and accidentally threaten his own existence. I mean, like, it's so, who doesn't understand that? I mean, it's like, it's a simple idea, and it's a brilliant idea. And and it's great. And I think that it points to like you said with the Pepsi or the gas station attendants that all come out and take care of the car. All of these things that I think I mentioned this in the book. I don't remember if this survived the edit. It might not have, but one of the things too is the cafe is actually the gym that Marty skateboards by in the beginning of the film, to Power of Love. And so to me, and I think this might have been cut out of the book at some point, but to me that's such a subtle statement on cafes, restaurants are these you eat and gain weight at the expense of because you're socializing and you're having fun, and it's that. Whereas gyms are the opposite. You are focusing on yourself, and it's not about interacting, and it's about trying to, be, healthy or narcissistic, depending on how you want to describe it. And so, again, that's sort of a sign of the times too. That being about yourself is,
that's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
I know, and it got cut out of the book. Too bad.
No, I was thinking though that there's this awareness though of so many things that are not so good. You could probably imagine that bullies maybe are not as vicious. Well, who knows? Biff shows up in the 50s. It doesn't show up in the 80s.
Right.
Goldie Wilson would never become a mayor in the 50s. There's all this. There's a back and forth. There's a conversation going on between the decades. But I know that I've way taken up more of your time than I said I would. But it is such a delight to talk about this book. Okay, so as I wrap up, the book is from Penguin, right? The book is from Plume.
Plume is an imprint of Penguin Random House. Yes. Right.
And it's We Don't Need Roads: The Making of the Back to the Future trilogy. You can get it at your favorite bookstore. You can get it at Amazon. And Caseen Gaines, I'm so happy that you took the time to talk to us. It was really, really a delight. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful evening. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too.